basically we are becoming, more and more of helicopter parents in the real world, but we are becoming more and more disengaged in the reality world. And it needs to be the exact opposite. We need to parent less in the real world and parent more in the reality world.
Welcome to This Way Up, the podcast dedicated to supporting parents and caregivers navigating the complex world of mental health. I'm Andrea, and each episode we dive deep into the conversations that matter, exploring the challenges, triumphs, and transformative journeys of those facing mental health struggles within their families. Whether you're here for expert advice, inspiring stories, or just a little boost to get you through the day, we've got you covered. So grab a cup of coffee, kick back, and join us as we find the bright spots in the mental health journey, because we're all climbing our way up together. Welcome to This Way Up. I am Andrea, your host, and today I am beyond excited to welcome Erin Harris, the incredible force behind Undo Mindset, an international nonprofit that is hoping to transform the way that we approach mental health. Her journey began when she was a teacher during a school shooting incident, which obviously led her to seeking therapy. And through her therapy and that experience, she realized something deeply important to her, that many people, especially those in underserved communities, don't have the same access to mental health care as others. And this realization actually led her to creating Undo Mindset. Erin is under the belief that mental health should be targeted as a proactive measure rather than us looking at it reactively. We'll chat today about why we're seeing such an uptick in mental health challenges and why it's so important to take care of our minds before it becomes a problem. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you did, please subscribe and share with anybody who you think might enjoy this. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here today with Erin. She is just a ball of energy and a ton of fun. Erin, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am a former educator, but currently I am the founder and executive director of Undo Mindset. I spent 15 years in the classroom and actually ended my educational career in a school shooting. It was gang related, no fatalities. One student was shot, but it was super traumatic. So I checked myself after that happened. I checked myself into a mental health facility where I learned really amazing skills and tools and just recognized a couple of things in that experience. One is that we are absolutely not teaching this in our schools, and we should be. Two is that, mental health is truly a privilege, and we do it in such a reactive way in our country. So it's a privilege and it's after the fact. I had to be an adult in crisis, have insurance and $1,600 cash. I don't think that is how our mental health system should work in our country. So we are on a mission to really change that and make our curriculum, which is a computer-based curriculum, equitable and accessible, and really get it out there to marginalized communities that haven't otherwise had the financial means to potentially access some of these resources. We are a fairly new nonprofit, but we are also a huge nonprofit in that we have, I think over 110 volunteers working on this project now.
Wow. How long ago did this start?
Well, we only just became a nonprofit about 2 months ago, not even.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. But we started, kind of gathering board members about a year ago. It's been about a year that we've been really working on this project. And yeah, we have people coast to coast, internationally. In a world that feels like it is on fire, it's a really beautiful thing to see all these people come together to try to be part of a solution and really, fix this narrative.
What an incredible movement that you started.
Yeah. I love that you said movement. My marketing director said that to me last week.
Oh, look at that.
And she said, Erin, I don't know if you were meaning to start a movement, but I think you are. And I was like, it wasn't necessarily my intention, but I am absolutely here for it because it is the right kind of movement that we absolutely need. So yeah, if we can do it, let's do it.
One of the things you said that just resonates with me is that we are such a reactive society to mental health. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons we're where we are today.
1,000%. hmm And I even think about it in the smallest nuances of it, right? So like I always come from the educator perspective, and I think about like what are our systems around mental health, even for our young kids, where it should be proactive because the trauma hasn't really impacted their lives quite yet. And we like, a kid becomes dysregulated. We kind of take them out of the classroom. We do a lot of reactive trying to put a Band-Aid back on it, but we aren't really doing any of the things that we need to like build them with the tools and skills prior to the hard things so that when hard things happen, we are able to really navigate them correctly. So yeah, I mean, truly from like the little kids all the way up to our greater world, all of our mental health stuff is really trying to figure out what was our previous trauma and how did we navigate it and how can we refile that paper in our filing cabinet of a brain and how can we retroactively go back and fix the things. But if we could get skills and tools in our beings prior to that, we would come out in a much better place in a healthier society.
Okay, so I'm having a flood of thoughts right now, and they're actually they're conflicting. So I'm going to say one, and then you're going to say, yes. Does this person have like two personalities because she's going to be coming from the complete opposite side? But the first one is, I even look back, I've got a 19 and 21-year-old. And now that I'm a lot deeper in all of this, I look back and think, oh my gosh, if I would have known this, if I would have known this. And, we do the best with what we know at the time, right? Mm-hmm. But instead of maybe worrying about whether or not I was nursing correctly, it sure would have also been nice, I think, to have a provider at some point be teaching me about young child psychology, how to, early on when they were 2 and they were having a meltdown, how to help them manage those feelings and learn what those feelings are. I mean, we didn't know that.
Well, and I can speak to that because, I was an educator prior to having my own children.
Yeah.
And it absolutely helped me in so many ways. And, my husband, who's not an educator, he could see the benefits of my knowledge and my experiences and my education. And he would oftentimes be like, I trust you and will rely on your opinion for how we solve this and yada, yada, yada. And it's definitely hard for me, I think, sometimes as an educator to look at people who are not educators. I'm like, why are you doing that? I know what the outcome of that is. I've seen that on repeat in my journey. And I have to just constantly remind myself like, oh, they're just parents doing parenting things because they didn't have the privilege of being an educator and learning the research and, understanding the development. So 100%, I agree that the more we can know in that portion of that journey, the better we are really helping them when they become teenagers, when it gets really hard. Okay, what's the conflicting view though?
Okay, hold on. I need to finish this.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
But the really hard thing is we're, at least me, we're so stressed out also as a young parent, not knowing everything. So then all of that is just like this big soup of dysfunction. And I'm not going to say my kids are, I think actually I'm just going to brag. I think I did a really good job, but I look back
I think that
and I
stage
know
of any that stage is challenging. It is a hot mess of a stage when you have little kids and toddlers. Once they kind of reach like 3rd grade and they become a little more independent, it's a lot easier for sure. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. When your kids are little and it feels really chaotic, how do you get the capacity and the time and the energy and all this stuff to also do that homework? When, I think like partnerships, I look at partnerships in that stage of familyhood, and they're always struggling because it's really hard to have the time and space to process your emotions and then voice your emotions and then discuss and resolve and all the things. I mean, it's the same thing within our own beings as parents. We are so like, and it's an emotional journey because you're constantly doubting yourself and trying to pick yourself back up and you're trying to give yourself grace and then you're screwing up and you're trying to learn from your mistakes. And I mean, it's a journey. And then on top of that, you have the guilt and then you're trying to say, well, I should have done this and I should have learned that. And it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot, but it's an important stage as I'm looking back now. It's so important. Also from the sense of being able to detect things. Mm-hmm. So like I look back now and I say, my daughter was struggling with anxiety early on and she was doing one heck of a job at coping skills at a young age. She was pulling herself away and I never just picked up on that until later. And I looked back and I was like, Oh, this makes sense. Okay. Now my conflicting side. So it appears that we have mental health is a lot more prevalent these days. Whether or not it is, I don't know. Now, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, nobody was talking about trauma. No one was talking about feelings and none of this. And it didn't appear that there was a mental health crisis. So how in the world is it that we just all stuffed our emotions back then? Or what has happened?
The answer is yes. And
okay.
I think that there's a lot to it. Okay. So that's a super complex question to answer. I think that we didn't know a lot about the brain because technological advancements hadn't caught up with us yet. I think the more we know, the more we can diagnose, right?
Right.
I think the other thing too that I am on a mission to do is destigmatize the human experience. I love the verbiage of neurodiversity. And I love that everybody's kind of like, oh yeah, I'm neurodivergent. It's just like this blanket name for humanity, in my opinion, because we are all neurodivergent. I think the other thing that we should also always recognize is that trauma is very much part of the human experience. Like, I don't think there is a single human on this planet that gets to leave and exit this planet without trauma. I do think that like in the earlier days, we're just trying to move away from like that narrative of like dudes can't have emotions. And, you know, I think even in the females world, that narrative trickled into us to where we feel like we are always being judged being dramatic or something if we do have emotions. So we're trying to figure out how to stifle our emotions and whatnot. But I think as science progresses, as technology progresses, as we learn more about what it means to be a human in general and how our brains work, we are understanding more and more. And we are realizing that this is all just part of being a human. This is how we tick, and having emotions is actually something we need. I always say it's a human right to have emotions and to understand your emotions deeply. It is just like oxygen and food and shelter and all these other things, in my opinion. I think it was really, really, really inhumane of us to tell men to not have emotions, because to know your emotions and the broad spectrum of your emotions and then how to responsibly navigate your emotions is something all humans deserve to feel and understand. But, you know, the other thing, I mean, I always just say like the three parts of our body that I equate to like the Marianas Trenches is our brain, our guts, and our hormones. I suspect, I mean, just in the last decade, we have seen so much progression on the understanding and research around these areas. But I still feel like we just don't know nearly enough about how they all tie together, too.
I know.
And I think then I'm hopeful in the next couple of decades, we'll really have a greater understanding of those links. But again, I think that when we think about history of understanding humanity, we're really just getting to the starting point. And so like, yeah, maybe 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we really weren't paying attention to it that much. But that doesn't mean it didn't exist. It's like I said to my mom we go to therapy together. And I said to her, I said, just because you refuse to acknowledge that you have mental health stuff going on because you're human, not because I'm shaming her, but like we all do, doesn't mean the rest of us don't have to deal with it. Like you can acknowledge it exists or you can not acknowledge it exists, but we are all still kind of navigating it.
Right. And it's nothing to be ashamed of.
No, it's human.
Yeah.
It's so human. We need to destigmatize the human experience. We all have self-doubt. We all go through these cycles. And the other thing I want to mention too, just talking about like our history, I'm reading a really amazing book right now, and it's super informative. I'm going to pull up the title because I would never remember otherwise. It's called The Anxious Generation and How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. And it's by Jonathan, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, Haidt, Haidt. But it's a very, very, very recently published book. So it has very, very current statistical data for us. And in his data, you can see like a huge link between when he has charted like, when did Facebook start? And here is our mental health trends. And when did Facebook buy Instagram? And here is the mental health trends. When did we go from flip phones to smartphones? When did we go from this to that, you know? And then also he looks at it, not just even from like a US perspective, but a global perspective. And then he compares like the trends of previous mental health stuff, like prior to this technological stage that we're in or whatever. And he said, you know, like some people are saying, oh, mental health is on the rise because we have so much like historical things happening in our world right now. But then he looks back on the research of every time we've had historical stuff. And they've determined that there is no correlation or causation between historical things and mental health. There can be like some increased anxiety or fluctuation, but like over the broader timeline of things, it doesn't actually put us on the trajectory of mental health issues that we are on currently.
Well, going back to your point, which is trauma is part of the human experience. And any major issue we've had throughout, as a matter of fact, we've had probably less than so many generations. So we're learning how to deal with that.
But this generation, like, I don't even know. He called it something else. After Gen Z, he called it something else. But he was like, basically doesn't even matter because until we can solve, like we will call Gen Z until we are able to figure out how to like rope in our technological issues because they're all going to be in that same bucket of just whatever. And I say this all the time in my work. I say this to my junior board members, which are our middle schoolers, high schoolers, college age kids all the time.
I love that you have those, by the way.
They are my bosses. I adore those humans. But I say to them all the time, like they're being raised in a vastly different time frame than anything any previous generation can even try to empathize or support them in, which is why I call them my bosses, because ultimately we want to help the next gen. But like, my husband is a police officer in the town we live in. And he always says to me when I do ride-alongs, he's always like, Erin, do you really want to come? Because once you see something, like you can't unsee something. And I've seen it. I've seen people unalive themselves and I've seen death and I'm like, whatever. And I'm not fazed by it in the same way because it's not personal to me. And I think that being married to a police officer, you kind of get to this place of not being immune to it, but like you just see it on a repeated pattern. On the flip side, though, our children are in that same exact place, but they don't have the developed brains because your brain doesn't stop developing until at least 25. They don't have people around them who actually know how to do this work and support them and necessarily like help them process things. But we are giving them access to all the world's knowledge. They are seeing other kids like explode in the Ukraine. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And this is truly the generation of worry because they have so much trauma.
Yeah.
And we have to, at some point as the adult world, like name and identify the traumas that they have experienced in their very small lives so that we can start fixing it. But I don't feel like adults are really like, the kids are screaming about it, but the adults are not paying attention.
Well, I wonder if adults even realize, right? It was almost like a light switch just was flipped up, right? It wasn't that we had this gradual progression. I mean, it may seem like it was a gradual progression from MySpace to Facebook to Instagram.
There was actually a switch. So the book that I'm reading.
Oh, good. I'm so smart.
The book that I'm reading is talking about there is actually a defined moment when there was like a light switch. And what it was on the internet. Oh, God, I wish I could remember what year this was like past or whatever. But, when you go on like the internet, if I want to go on to rhymes with corn, but starts with P. I don't know if I can talk about this on your show or not.
Yeah, it's fine. We'll mark it. But
perfect.
Yeah. Yes, you can. Please do. I mean, not really, but you know what I mean.
Got it. Yes. When you go to those sites, there was a defined date in history when we went from like you couldn't access to now you can say, yes, oh yeah, I'm 18 and above, and I can put in my own date. I actually remember when this happened, there was a shift where I was like, whoa, now we just have literally unlimited access to the things.
Yeah.
And even my son was saying that last night. He was like, oh, I made a LinkedIn profile so I could follow you, Mom, on LinkedIn. I said, but you don't have a job, dude. He's like, oh yeah, no, I just made it all up. Like,
yeah, that's true, right?
Don't tell me. But truly, they're doing that to all of the, not LinkedIn necessarily. And it's interesting. I would be curious to know what that year was, because I bet you probably, if I could pull that year up, you would probably be like, oh yeah, that is when my memory, that light switch went off.
Mm-hmm. So with a light switch, right, because it's so immediate, we haven't had the opportunity to evaluate it, or it doesn't sit present on, top of mind. So like
out of sight, out of mind.
Right. And so like when your kids are out there and they're being exposed to maybe not even corn with a P, they're still being exposed to situations that we never processed as a kid. And we as adults may not look at as being so traumatic because we've had 30, 40, 50 years of processing that. So I think as parents, back to we do the best with what we know, is that maybe this is something that we really, I mean, at 19 and 21, I'm past that, but as younger parents is really understanding your kids are being exposed to this. I'm sorry, it is. Now, how do we help them manage it with the little brains that they have?
This author talks about how this great rewiring of society, we have seen a shift in parenting. And it's basically like, we as parents, I wish I could word it the exact same way he did, but basically like we are becoming, more and more of helicopter parents in the real world, but we are becoming more and more disengaged in the reality world. And it needs to be the exact opposite. We need to parent less in the real world and parent more in the reality world.
Wow. Okay. Repeat that again, because that is huge, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we have to parent less in the real world. We have to allow our kids to go get hurt. We have to allow our kids to have agency in problem solving and how to navigate all things real world in the real world. We need to parent more in the remote world, online, in understanding what they're watching on YouTube. We're not giving them access to YouTube. Who are they playing with on video games? How are they talking in those video game worlds? And again, it has to be like the very nuance. It's not even just like, oh, you can't follow Andrew Tate on YouTube. That's easy parenting.
Right.
It has to be the hard parenting of like, who was that you were just talking to? Do you know their name? Do you know where they live? Do you know how old they are? What were you talking about? Like, really, did you tell them you're home alone? Did you tell them this, that, or the other thing? Like the nuance of those experiences, because children are basically at this point raising each other. Children are very much turning to their peers instead of their adults in how to find that guidance. And there's another book, I can never remember the title of it for you, that talks about it so deeply. And honestly, after 15 years in the classroom, I could not agree more that parents and adults don't understand their kids, and their lived experience is so vastly different. And we have to turn the guidance to them. And it feels hard because we're the adults, they're the kids. We don't want them guiding us in this work. But we have to listen to them because they know they're way smarter than we ever were at their age,
Oh, yeah.
And they're knowing what they need and what guidance they need, and they can tell us.
So we had a therapist on our first season, and he basically was talking about how he even parents his adult child now. And he was saying that exact thing, which was, I don't understand the world that you're in. I try to, but you're living very differently than I am. Talk to me about it and educate me on it. Second point was we had another guest on who was against, she's talking about technology and how severely detrimental it is to our kids. And there is a philosophy that you just don't expose your kids to it, right? You take it away from your kids. I see a problem with that in the fact that it's not going away.
Can I tell you what I just wrote down?
Yes.
Age of overexposure, because something I talk about all the time, parents come to me a lot for parenting guidance. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, please.
But between my involvement in the education system and my nonprofit and my husband's work and being in the mental health world, when I say a lot, I mean multiple people a day will constantly be like, this is what happened. What do I do? And I constantly come back to this main point of that we are in the age of overexposure and we can't do anything about it. You can try to shelter your kids, but what's going to happen is that's going to bite you in the butt because your kids are going to be exposed, period. They're going to be exposed by their peers. They're going to be exposed by other kids. Even if your kids are like isolated in their homes, they will be exposed. There is absolutely no way to not have that happen. I believe we are no longer in the stage of like keeping our kids in these bubbles, but rather we need to pop those bubbles and we need to help them navigate it. We need to, instead of being the keepers of the information ourselves, we need to be the people who are helping them process that information.
Right.
What
exactly.
is real versus what is not. Like my kids are 8 and 12, almost 13, and I am very transparent about them all the time. So again, talking about corn with a P, I tell my kids, even at 8 and 12, like, if you want to know what this is, let's talk about it. I want to talk to you about that. But if I don't talk to you about it, you're still going to figure it out. Like, there's no way to avoid that. And then you're going to have a really unhealthy relationship with all things
absolutely
corn with a P, involves. And then where are we, right? We are like 12 steps behind the curve and where we need to be. I would rather be the person that I can have I don't want to be friends with my kids, but I want to be friends with my kids. It's a fine line. Like, I want them to know.
Well, it's interesting. My daughter will say to me often, she's like, I don't know why I'm sharing this with you. And she's like, and then she'll share it. And it's not like gossip, but it's like stuff that, that I feel so privileged that I can have those conversations with my kids about because of what you just said. They're going to hear it from somebody.
There's people who will shame you for that, though.
Oh, I know.
There are people on this planet who will be like, oh, you just want to be best friends with your kids. And it's like, it's not that, though. Like, it's different than that. Because my kids, if I say no and I give them the look, my kids don't push back. Like, they know mom means business. And I'm absolutely respected and taken seriously as the authoritarian parent or whatever. Not that I strive to be, but like, I want my kids to come to me if they're unsure what is real versus what is not. I want my kids to come to me before they make stupid decisions, like eating Tide Pods because the internet told them that they should do that.
Well, and I think that is the difference. I don't think that when I see or I think of parents that try to be friends with their kids, that is somebody trying to hang out.
Mean Girls.
Yeah.
Mean Girls, I'm the cool mom.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That's not it. But I want to have real conversations with my kids. Mm-hmm. And I don't want my kids to be afraid to come and say, what is this? Or I'm thinking about this. Or in worst case scenario, I did this. Let's talk about it because I'm not going to shame you, but we need to work through, what all this means.
I love that you use the word shame. I talk about shame a lot. I actually don't feel shame in my life. I personally have done a lot of work around shame because it's not purposeful. And I think we live in such a shame-based society.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, shame is literally what is the hands on the clock that make us tick at this point as society. And I think that previous generations very much relied on shame in order to parent their kiddos. And we're trying to change that as society. And it's slow, but I think that, my son recently had his first kiss and he texted me literally 4 minutes later.
Oh my God.
And I, as a mom, I'm like, that to me tells me I am not in a space where my children feel shame to be human, and that is to me, like, I don't want to, pat my own shoulder, but to me, that tells me I am on the right track to be a guiding light for my children as they continue to go through the struggles of teenhood and life. I want them to know they can always turn to me, even if it's hard stuff about like kissing. Like I didn't have that relationship with my parents. Like when I wanted to shave my legs, I had to be like to my sister, Kate. I was like, can you get me a razor? I want to just try shaving my legs because I was so embarrassed versus now with my 8-year-old. I'm like, if you want to shave your legs, I don't care. If you don't want to shave your legs, I don't care. Like, let's just be open about it all.
Well, you know what? Getting back to the word shame, that is a big reason we're in a mental health crisis as well, because historically, if you had something going on where you were struggling with some sort of mental health issue or even not even considered an illness, just anxiety for a period of time, you felt shame about it because it meant something was wrong with you, which is like the worst method.
We are also not we, all of us, because I don't, but there's a lot of people who are very intentionally trying to shame people for mental health stuff per our political environment. Like, oh, you think that? Well, you must be crazy or you need mental health issues. And I think that's a really slippery slope. And I think it's really dangerous. And I think it's honestly degrading because everybody has trauma, and trauma creates literally differences in our brains. So we all have mental health stuff. It is what it is. And I think that we're just going to make it even more political and polarized if we continue down this road.
Well, and I think right now we're in a situation where it's also getting kind of this muddy soup of what is a mental health issue versus what are some natural human responses to things. And I think that also is very detrimental to kids that are now going through saying, I'm depressed, I have ADHD, I have OCD, all of these things. And it's like, wait a second.
I don't think it has to be dangerous, though. Like, I think it can be done in a productive way. I mean, so my daughter, for example, she has ADHD and she just recently started medication. And my friend was over and my daughter was around and my friend whispered to me, like, how's it going on her medication? And I was like, you don't need to whisper because there's nothing wrong with it.
I was thinking dangerous where there's kids that are not understanding exactly, like they're like, all of a sudden they've got anxiety. And you and I both know there is clinical anxiety where you're taking medication and you're taking, you're going to therapy and you're really trying to work on it because it's something that's happening, physiologically to you, versus the anxiety of, oh my gosh.
I get what you're saying.
That's where I'm saying it's dangerous because there's got to be some framework and education to kids about like, yep, that's anxiety too, but it's not out of control. That's just normal anxiety.
100%. And I think that we're seeing this muddling of verbiage, period, like these extreme ideologies. We have I don't know, because we have no expertise anymore in society. Like all expertise has been thrown out the door because, well, podcasting to everybody has a voice to you can find other people with similar opinions now to all the things. And so you think about, I don't know, both sides of the political spectrum are like, you're a bigot. And it's like, but there's actually a clearly defined definition. But now we're just throwing it everywhere that it just feels like now there's no meaning behind any of the words.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. There was something else I was going to say about what you were saying before, and I lost my train of thought.
It's probably because I interrupted.
It's probably because I have ADHD.
That's okay too. That's fine. But I do think that the very positive thing about all of this is that we're talking about it.
100%.
And we are so much more educated in it today than even 20 years ago when I had my kids. And I feel so hopeful. And I just think that what we're seeing is kind of this place of where, what direction do we need to be going? And people like you are now also trying to bring it to the masses, right? I mean, I think you and I talked about how I feel so fortunate that I was able to take the time and had the resources to be able to focus on my kids when they struggled. And there's so many that don't have that opportunity. And where do they go? What do they do? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Undo and trying to bring it to the schools. What does it look like?
I just want to speak really quickly.
Okay, go for it.
I think with what you were saying before, bringing this conversation to a greater scale is really going to be the best thing we can do to combat that shame, is to really change that narrative. People who were feeling shame, the kids, younger kids, they're very quick to be like, oh yeah, that's my ADHD. And they're so flippant about it because they've been destigmatized and they don't see anything wrong with it. And so I do think the progression is slow. I myself am I thought we were all understanding this stuff. So the lack of progression now feels sometimes a little jarring. But I do think that as society, we are slowly progressing in the right direction. And we are understanding that mental health is super important, not just for our brains and our headspace, but for our whole bodies. It's connected and it's so relevant. We cannot be healthy human beings if we are not mentally taking care of ourselves. Okay, thank you for asking me about Undo. So we have quite a few initiatives that we're working on. We have, like I said, our junior board. Our junior board is doing amazing work, and they feed 175 transient folks every week here in the Denver metro area. And they're working currently on a system to bring, again, our curriculum is online. So bringing our curriculum to our to our transient population here in the Denver metro area in a way that is free, accessible, and equitable. And then kind of copying, pasting that all over, not just the country, but we have junior board members in other countries. And I've promised them we will also help their communities as well. In addition to that, we have recognized that a lot of transient folks have cell phones, but they don't necessarily have internet access. So we are working on creating a committee of folks. So if anybody's listening and wants to join us in this work, we're trying to gather people to try to get our curriculum on every single library computer in our country free of charge, because we know that people who are usually using those computers are people who don't have the financial means to necessarily access mental health resources. We have a men's group where we really talk about destigmatizing all things male emotional needs. Like I said before, what we've done as a society is awful. And I think that, I wrote down earlier, men and shame. I think it's important when we address this male challenge that we're seeing in society that we recognize it's not their fault. I think that when we shame people, and I think men have felt a lot of shame because for a very long time, for decades, because they're either too manly or they're not manly enough. There's always somebody who's blaming them for this shooting and this school shooting and yada, 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 yada. And you guys, especially white men, you guys did slavery back in the day. And so that's your fault. And they're like, I didn't do any of these things. And I think that the male society, the community is feeling maybe insecure and maybe like almost like a cornered dog, right? Like if you corner me and blame me for all the things, I'm going to bite back and bark, right? And I think it's super important for society to not necessarily blame them, educate them and help them understand how to navigate and shift so we can get into a healthier headspace. But our men's group is really a bunch of dudes who talk about how do we make sure that men in our society are doing that external work, but also doing the internal work. Like I said before, my goal is always and will always be to get into our K-12s free of charge. We want to be accessible not just to our kiddos, but also their home support networks. We want to give it to them free of charge because, like I said, we all need to play catch up and bubble wrap our kiddos in this work. And then our educators as well. I think there's a lot of educators in our society that don't truly understand trauma themselves. And so they're not necessarily supporting our trauma kids in a way that is, scientifically fact. We have a vision of being able to get into our higher education system. So like a freshman year required course. We are working on becoming government contractors so that we can support our active duty and vets in this way. We have a partnership with an addiction recovery center, but we would love to expand that work to make sure we're accessible to all folks doing that really incredible work. We have a pre-postpartum mom and dad's group, mom and dads, because, that journey of trying to get ready for bringing a human into your life to then bringing a human into your life is really jarring for all people. I don't think any partnerships are really solid in those stages because it's hard to communicate and really problem solve and do any of that work. So we want to make sure that we're helping and supporting that community during that transition. We are working on a partnership with a place that is incarcerating children at 12. Oof. They are, I know, right? My son's almost 13. I'm like, I can't even process that.
I almost have tears in my eyes because I can't imagine.
I have chills. Every time I say that, I get chills.
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
They're babies.
Babies. But they're incarcerating 12-year-olds. So that is our first incarceration location that we are trying to get into. But we are looking to be accessible to, all of our prisons and jail systems in our country. And last but not least, I promise I'm almost done with all of our initiatives. But like I said before, my husband is a police officer here. And he actually, about 2 weeks ago, watched a man unalive himself. Oh. And he has been struggling really hard since then. And so I woke up the next day and said, you know what? I'm the boss of this. We're going to start with first responders because It was supposed to be phase 2 or phase 3. But, normal humans, they say, experience trauma about 4 to 8 times in their lives. First responders, it's 300 to 800 times in their lives. So if they're enduring trauma every day, we need to be doing something else because we literally as a society have just not. So that's what we're on a journey to do.
Okay, first of all, I don't know how you sleep at night. That is a lot. And I love it all. I think there is a place for a volunteer in any aspect of that. I mean, if you've got any interest of volunteering, that would be...
If you are interested in getting resources, mental health resources out to anyone, reach out because we have literally, not that you should put humanity into buckets, but we've identified like 8,000 different buckets of humanity that we haven't supported in this way that we probably should. And so we truly have a vision of being able to get out there in every single market and infiltrate every single system that hasn't otherwise integrated this type of work. So even if these are our core initiatives that we're working on now in phase 1 of our development, but we have several phases, but in the next 3 to 5 years, ideally, we would love for it to be completely opened to every person, no matter your trauma, no matter your lived experience. We want to make sure that you're getting your needs met through our online curriculum.
We're a podcast about parenting children or caregiving children that have mental health conditions. What I heard from you, though, even every single bucket that you had trickles down to the kids, whether it's the educator or the first responders. Most of them are parents. The educator, they're a parent and they're touching your own kid. There's just, it all trickles down.
I also think that it's important. I don't even know what her actual position is called. We call her the nonprofit doctor, but she's basically, if our nonprofit is a living, breathing entity, she's making sure that it stays alive and healthy and can grow up from this baby to toddlerhood to so on. She was like, Erin, what initiative is like, if nothing else happened but this, what is your initiative? I said, well, that's easy. It's K-12s. And she was like, because you're an educator. I said, no, because that is proactive.
Right.
Everything else is reactive. And that is what is wrong with our system, is that we continue to try to put Band-Aids on things after the fact. And this is literally like our health system to our government system, to our police system, to our education. Literally, that's just how we function in society in our country. And we want to change that. And the only way we're going to change that is if we actually get out to the kids. We have to be accessible to our K-12 kids if we want to be reactive. Oh my God, I always do that. If you want to be proactive instead of reactive, that is literally the only way we can. And equitable, right? Like I can try to market to every single bucket, but if we can get into every K-12, then we know every kid in the next gen will get the skills and tools they need to make sure that when trauma happens, they are more equipped and ready to actually handle it in a way where they don't have to later in life take that paper out of that filing cabinet and try to, fix the paper and shuffle it back into the right place like I had to do.
Right. Good for you. I am so impressed and I am excited to see where this ends up going because
Thank you. Me too.
You've thought about it correctly. You really have. And thank you.
I hope we're able to break generational trauma, generational cycles. Really, it's hard for me to hand this planet off to my children. So I can't fix it all, but I'm hoping this does a drop in the bucket for us in some way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. On behalf of all parents out there, thank you. We need it. We need it. Thanks for tuning in to This Way Up. I hope you're feeling a little lighter, a little brighter, and ready to take on whatever comes next. Remember, the journey of mental health is all about progress, not perfection. So keep climbing. And don't forget to celebrate the small wins. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little lift.